You may know every important phrase in this teaching and still remain confused, because the same four words are so often asked to mean everything. State, assumption, feeling, the end. They belong together, certainly, but they are not identical, and until each is given its proper function, practice becomes strained. One person tries to manufacture joy all day and calls that feeling. Another repeats a sentence endlessly and calls that assumption. Another constructs elaborate scenes, yet remains inwardly the same anxious person who began imagining. And still another says, "It will happen. It is coming. Perhaps tomorrow," and calls that living in the end. But tomorrow is not the end. It is waiting, dressed in spiritual language. So let us be precise. The end is the fulfilled standpoint you inwardly occupy. The state is the identity living from that standpoint. Assumptions are the truths that seem natural to that identity. And feeling is the inward sense that those truths are real, not necessarily excitement, not constant happiness, but reality, acceptance, naturalness. We will separate these four, examine them, and then bring them together again through one continuous example. For this teaching is not a collection of beautiful expressions to be admired. It is a movement of consciousness to be performed. Now, think of one desire of your own. Do not change it. Simply observe yourself in relation to it. Are you standing within its fulfillment, looking at life as the person for whom it is already settled? Or are you standing outside it, looking toward it as something distant that must still arrive? That distinction reveals more than all your words. For you may speak of fulfillment while occupying absence. Therefore, having placed these four terms clearly before us, let us begin with the one that contains the others, the state from which a person lives. A state is not one thought passing through the mind. It is not one feeling passing through the body. A state is the identity you inwardly occupy, the organized position from which your thoughts, expectations, interpretations, reactions, and actions arise as one living pattern. Consider the words "I am." Awareness is present before any description is added. But then you clothe it. I am wanted, I am unwanted, I am secure, I am threatened, I am capable, I am overlooked. These descriptions reveal the state you are wearing. And while you wear it, life is encountered through it. Two people may enter the same interview, dressed equally well and answering the same questions. Yet they do not enter from the same state. One enters seeking permission to believe in his value. He studies every expression, fears every pause, and hears uncertainty in an innocent question. The other enters knowing his contribution has value. He listens, responds, and remains inwardly composed. The outward action appears similar, but the identities performing it are different. And the state gives meaning to events. A delayed reply becomes proof of rejection to one person, a neutral fact to another, and a small inconvenience to a third. The message is the same. The interpreter is not. Now, fear may visit you. That does not mean you must become the frightened person. An emotion is an experience. A state is the identity that claims the experience as truth. You may notice anxiety without declaring, "This is who I am, and this determines what comes next." Nor must you deny a present circumstance. A fact may be acknowledged without being worn as a name. You can say, "This condition is present," without saying, "This condition defines me." So ask yourself, what do I expect without effort? What does this event seem to mean about me? Which inner conversations return again and again? What outcome feels normal before I consciously choose one? Your answers reveal the state more clearly than an isolated thought ever could. Think of a state as a dwelling place. Your thoughts are the conversations heard within it. Your reactions are its habits. Your actions are the paths naturally taken from its door. But every dwelling contains propositions that seem obvious to the one living there. Those accepted propositions are what we call assumptions. An assumption, then, is one of those propositions you have accepted as true. It is more than a thought that crosses the mind, for many thoughts cross the mind and vanish. An assumption is a thought to which you have given inward consent. often so quietly and so repeatedly that you no longer remember consenting to it. One person says, "I am never considered." That conclusion belongs naturally to the state of being overlooked. Another says, "My contribution is recognized." That conclusion belongs to the state of being valued. The sentences matter because they reveal the identity speaking through them. So keep the distinction clear. The state is the person you are being. The assumption is what appears true to that person. The state is the organized identity. Assumptions are its accepted conclusions about you, about others, and about the way life works. And they move together. Repeated assumptions stabilize a state, while an occupied state produces more assumptions of its own kind. If I dwell in the identity of one who is unwanted, I will assume that silence means rejection, that distance means abandonment, and that affection must be earned. Each conclusion, then, strengthens the identity from which it came. Suppose a person desires better employment. Outwardly, he says, "I want a new position." Yet inwardly, he says, "People like me are passed over. The field is too crowded. Nothing opens at the right time." His desire points toward advancement, but his assumptions keep him living as the one for whom advancement is withheld. Desire tells you what you want. Assumption tells you what you presently accept as real. And no intensity of wanting can perform the work of acceptance. This is why empty repetition becomes exhausting. The lips may say, "I am secure," while the inner conversation prepares explanations for another failure. The issue is not how many times the sentence is spoken. The issue is whether awareness has moved into the identity for whom the sentence is natural. When the old conclusion appears, do not wrestle with it. Recognize it. That is the language of the former state. Then give voice to the conclusion belonging to the state you choose. Try a simple test. Complete these sentences without polishing the answer. People usually, money always, when I try, I am the kind of person who. The effortless endings will expose your assumptions more honestly than ceremonial words. And if the new assumption initially feels unfamiliar, do not condemn it. Familiarity does not prove truth. It often proves repetition. Yet acceptance is not merely intellectual agreement. How does an assumption cease to be a sentence and acquire the texture of reality? This brings us to feeling. Now someone will ask, must I remain joyful, grateful, and emotionally elevated every hour in order to remain faithful? No. That is one of the great confusions surrounding the word feeling. An emotional high is not the definition of fulfillment, nor is it a dependable measure of conviction. Feeling, as we are using the word, is the experienced reality of an assumption. It is its naturalness, its inward credibility, the quiet consent that says, yes, this belongs to me. It is the difference between speaking of a condition and knowing yourself within it. Think of something you already possess securely. You do not celebrate it every minute. You do not repeatedly examine it to convince yourself it is yours. Its very ordinariness reveals acceptance. What is truly established in consciousness often feels quiet. Return to our example of the new position. The feeling of fulfillment need not be wild excitement. It may be the calm with which you return home after a satisfying week. It may be the ease of introducing yourself in your new role, or the settled knowledge that your work is useful and your compensation sufficient. The question has been answered, and therefore the strain has departed. So distinguish three things. Emotion is changing weather within the body and mind. Sensation is the imagined sound, touch, or sight used to make a scene present. Feeling is the deeper sense of reality that these details may help awaken. You may experience anxiety for a moment and still remain faithful to fulfillment. The decisive question is not, did fear appear? It is, did I crown fear as the authority that defines me and predicts my future? A visitor need not become the owner of the house. At first, a new condition may feel strange. Remain with it, and the strange becomes reasonable. Return to it, and the reasonable becomes familiar. Dwell there, and the familiar becomes natural. This is not accomplished by force, but by repeated inward occupancy. Do not watch your emotions anxiously. asking every few minutes, do I feel it strongly enough? That question places you back among those trying to obtain what they believe is absent. Longing says, perhaps one day. Excitement may say, something wonderful is near. But fulfilled feeling says quietly, the matter is settled. Excitement is welcome. Settlement is the aim. Feeling is not noise, not strain, not a performance for the world. It is the inward consent by which an imagined condition becomes your present psychological home. But settled in relation to what? Feeling requires a completed standpoint, and that standpoint is what we mean by the end. The end is the standpoint from which the desired change is no longer being pursued, because inwardly it has already become part of your life. It is not merely the event you want, it is the position you would occupy after the event had fulfilled its purpose. Consider again the desire for a new position. To think about it is to survey applications, interviews, competition, timing, qualifications, and every possible reason for delay. You remain outside the result, examining the road toward it. But to think from it is to hear congratulations after the position has been secured, to return home after a satisfying week, to know the question has been answered. This is why the end organizes everything else. Once the end is selected, it tells you who you are there. That determines the state. It tells you what is true there. Those are the assumptions, and it reveals what completion feels like when it is accepted. Now, do not confuse the end with the means. You may imagine sending an application, attending an interview, receiving a message, or watching another person change, yet still place fulfillment ahead of you. A scene belongs to the end only when it implies that the essential result has already occurred. And distinguish the essence from the form. If the essence of your desire is to be securely valued and usefully employed, do not imprison that fulfillment within one nervous sequence of events. You need not dictate every conversation or compel life to follow a route devised by anxiety. Choose the completed condition and let the scene testify to it. Ask yourself, what would be true of me if this were already accomplished? Then ask, what ordinary moment could occur only after that truth had become established? Perhaps you hear a trusted friend say, you are so much happier in this work. Perhaps you feel the familiar surface of your desk after a successful week. Perhaps the old urgency is simply absent, and you notice yourself making plans from security rather than fear. The scene need not be grand. It must imply completion. It is coming may sound faithful, but it assigns fulfillment to another time. The end is not the psychological future. It is the present identity of the one for whom the matter is settled. This does not require false public claims about current facts. You need not pretend to others that an event has already occurred. Living in the end means that unfinished appearances are no longer permitted to dictate who you are inwardly. The four terms are now individually clear. Let us bring them together in their proper order and watch how one fulfilled standpoint becomes an entire way of being. Now we can state the whole movement in one deliberate chain. Select the end. Occupy the identity for whom that end is fulfilled. Accept the propositions natural to that identity. Remain there until those propositions acquire the feeling of reality and naturalness. Begin with the end because the end supplies direction. In our example, do not begin with searching, applying, competing, or waiting for someone to decide your worth. Begin with the completed fact. You are securely and usefully employed. Who are you there? You are a valued, capable, well-placed contributor. But notice this is not merely a sentence to repeat. It is an identity from which you perceive the completed life. You look at work, opportunity, conversation, and yourself from that position. And what does such a person naturally assume? My abilities are useful. Recognition is normal. I can receive adequate compensation. Conversations can unfold favorably. Opportunity is not some alien exception, granted to everyone but me. These are not unrelated affirmations. They are the natural language of the chosen state. What feeling belongs to these accepted truths? Perhaps relief, perhaps steadiness, dignity, usefulness, or simple normality. One person may feel quiet gratitude, another may feel an absence of pressure. The emotional color may vary, but beneath it lies the same inward fact: completion. Now the sequence begins to move as one living process. The end calls forth the state. The state makes certain assumptions natural. Those assumptions deepen the feeling of reality, and that feeling stabilizes the state until your conduct begins to agree with it without force. Apply the same pattern elsewhere. In relationship, the end is not merely receiving a particular message. It is mutual, secure love. In finances, the end is not watching one payment arrive. It is stable sufficiency. A single event may serve as evidence, but the end is the fulfilled condition it implies. Therefore, ask 4 questions of any desire. What would prove completion? Who am I there? What is naturally true there? How does that truth feel when it has become ordinary? Persistence does not mean laboring over 4 separate techniques. You may enter through a scene, a statement, an inner conversation, or the bodily relief that follows resolution. The doorway may change. The destination does not. Each practice must bring you to the same fulfilled identity. So remember the equation. The end is where you stand. The state is who stands there. Assumptions are what that person knows. Feeling is the reality of standing there now. But a model proves its value only when it can be performed. Let us move from definition into a complete inward rehearsal that you can test for yourself. Now choose one desire, only one, and let it be something you can hold lovingly, responsibly, and without injury to another. For a moment, remove the anxious history from it. How long you have waited, who disappointed you, what has failed, and why reason says it may be difficult. Leave all that outside. Retain only the essential fulfilled condition. Ask yourself, what would be true after this matter had been resolved? Do not choose a sign that says fulfillment may be near. Do not choose a step that still leaves the question unanswered. Go beyond the message, beyond the meeting, beyond the promise. Where are you when the matter is done? Now form one short, ordinary scene that implies completion. Perhaps you are in a familiar room and hear the voice of someone you trust. Perhaps a hand rests upon your shoulder. Perhaps you touch an object that belongs naturally to the completed life. Keep it simple. And enter the scene in the first person. Do not watch yourself as though observing an actor. Look through your own eyes. Hear the words from where you stand. Feel the surface beneath your hand. Receive the congratulations, affection, or reassurance as words spoken directly to you. Then ask, who am I in this moment? Not who are you trying to become. Who are you now within the scene? Secure, chosen, respected, restored, supplied. Let the answer be a state of being. Notice what the scene assumes. If you are being congratulated, accomplishment is accepted. If you are resting peacefully, security is accepted. If you are warmly embraced, belonging is accepted. You need not repeat these propositions separately. They are contained within the implication of the scene. Now let feeling arise from that implication. Do not demand ecstasy. Does the urgency soften? Does the body become still? Does the scene begin to feel less like an invention and more like something remembered? That quiet shift is enough. Repeat the scene gently, keeping it brief and clear. You are not directing a complicated film. You are allowing one completed fact to become familiar. Absorption matters more than detail. Naturalness matters more than perfection. You may practice in the drowsy interval before sleep, when the demands of the outer world have grown quieter. But the power is not in the hour or the ritual. It is in inward acceptance. Then drop the technique. Rest for a moment as the fulfilled person. Carry that settled identity into sleep or into your next ordinary activity. Yet, old thoughts, Contrary appearances and imperfect emotions will return. So we must now understand what persistence requires after the scene is over. Persistence is not non-stop repetition. It is not forcing yourself to feel an emotion you do not feel, nor fighting every unwanted thought as though one moment of doubt could undo everything. Persistence is faithfulness to the state you have chosen. Think of present appearances as an echo. An echo repeats a sound already made. You would not stand in a valley arguing with it, nor would you mistake it for a new command. Yet this is what people do with circumstances. They see the result of a former expectation, react to it as final truth, and send the same conclusion outward again. Suppose a delay occurs, and the old thought rises. Nothing is changing. Do not debate it for an hour. Recognize it. That is the language of the waiting state. Then return to one simple implication of completion: the congratulating voice, the settled body, the quiet knowledge that the matter is answered. Fear appearing is not failure. Doubt becomes organizing only when you accept it, build a story around it, and permit it to restore the former identity. You may observe an old reaction without moving back into the old dwelling, and your reactions will show you whether the new state is becoming familiar. A former trigger loses some authority. You check less often. Imaginary arguments begin to soften. Action becomes clearer and less desperate. These changes matter because they reveal that identity is moving. Living from fulfillment does not forbid practical action. You may apply, speak, study, apologize, accept an offer, decline one, or make a necessary decision. But you act from the identity that already possesses worth and stability, not in order to purchase worth or force life to validate you. Nor should persistence be used to neglect urgent responsibilities, silence honest communication, or deny evidence where sound judgment is required. Inner authorship should make you steadier in life, not less discerning within it. So use this simple return. Recognize the former state. Refuse to condemn yourself for noticing it. Remember the chosen end. Re-enter one implication of completion. Then continue with your day. Every sincere return creates familiarity. What first felt ceremonial becomes reasonable. What became reasonable becomes ordinary. And what becomes ordinary begins to think, speak, and act through you without strain. Now that persistence is clear, we can expose the common substitutions that keep a sincere practitioner busy while leaving the old state untouched. These are not failures of sincerity. They are errors of category. A person may work diligently, yet assign the wrong function to a word or technique, and then wonder why the old identity remains undisturbed. First, state is confused with mood. A brief wave of happiness is called fulfillment. But once it passes, the same fearful expectations and defensive inner conversations return. Do not ask only, was I happy? Ask, who was I being when the excitement ended? Second, feeling is confused with intensity. Dramatic emotion is pursued while quiet naturalness is dismissed as insufficient. But volume does not prove reality. Seek settlement, familiarity, and inward acceptance. Third, assumption is confused with repetition. A sentence may be spoken 1,000 times while its opposite is still believed. Let words direct you into an identity, then test them. Do they begin to feel personally plausible and natural? Fourth, visualization is confused with fulfillment. One may construct magnificent scenes while watching oneself from a distance, or rehearse every step toward the result. Enter the scene as a participant, and choose one whose implication is completion. Fifth, desire is confused with the end. Longing is treated as devotion, and wanting becomes a daily ritual. Move from I want this to the inward standpoint of this belongs to who I am and how I live. Sixth, signs are confused with causes. The outer world is checked repeatedly for permission to believe. But if every sign determines your state, you are still allowing appearances to govern identity. Let signs remain secondary. Seventh, living from the end is confused with outward pretense or reckless conduct. It does not require false claims, neglected duties, or imprudent action. Preserve honesty and responsibility while changing the identity from which you meet the facts. Eighth, persistence is confused with strain. Every contrary thought becomes an emergency, and practice turns into policing the mind. Return gently. An old reaction may echo without becoming your dwelling again. So when your practice feels exhausting, do not immediately add another method. Perform this four-part audit. Where am I standing? Who am I being there? What am I accepting as true? What now feels real? Answer in that order, and the confusion begins to untangle. The technique can again serve the state rather than conceal it. Once these substitutions are removed, the teaching becomes visible in the ordinary day, in inner speech, memory, relationships, and action. A scene practiced at night is not separate from the consciousness you carry through the day. The state entered in silence will reveal itself in the conversations you rehearse, the meanings you assign, and the movements that feel natural when you rise and meet the world. Inner speech is the first mirror. You may affirm that you are respected, then spend the afternoon imagining criticism. You may declare yourself secure, then defend yourself inwardly before anyone has accused you. You may claim to be loved while rehearsing rejection in advance. These conversations reveal the assumptions still active beneath formal practice. When you notice them, do not become anxious. Change the conversation. Hear the words that would naturally follow harmony, recognition, or resolution. But more importantly, receive those words as the person to whom such treatment belongs. It is not merely what the imagined other says. It is who you are while hearing it. The same principle applies to memory. An event may have ended outwardly and remain alive psychologically because you continue reenacting it as proof of who you are. This is where revision becomes useful. Suppose a conversation ended in dismissal. Return to it inwardly. Hear understanding where you heard rejection. See the other person respond with respect. Feel yourself leave the exchange with dignity rather than humiliation. Then, accept the revised implication as consistent with the state you now choose. Revision is not a public denial of history. It is a refusal to grant a completed event perpetual authority over present identity and future expectation. Return again to our employment example. The person who formerly felt overlooked may now notice an opportunity that fear would have ignored. He writes with clarity, speaks without apology, or prepares with genuine interest. The action changes because its source has changed. And often interpretation changes before circumstances do. Silence no longer automatically means rejection. A delay is no longer promoted into a prophecy. A setback remains an event. It does not become a name. In relationships, use this understanding responsibly. Imagination is not a private instrument for conquering another person. Choose the essence, mutual affection, respect, harmony, and freedom. Become the self for whom these qualities are natural and remain open to their proper expression. So the whole daily pattern returns to our model. Revision changes assumptions attached to memory. Inner speech rehearses the state. Action expresses identity. The end keeps every practice directed toward one fulfilled condition rather than scattered self-improvement. Observe one day without anxious surveillance. Simply notice what identity is speaking through this reaction and what fulfilled identity can be chosen in its place. This expanded agency carries responsibility, for the same inward power used to free oneself can be misused through fear, blame, or attempted control. And this responsibility must be understood without cruelty. If identity and accepted assumptions influence perception, reaction, and conduct, then you are called to become more discerning about what you repeatedly entertain, not more condemning of yourself or anyone else. Do not turn this teaching into a weapon against your own past. You need not explain every wound by accusing yourself of having created it. Responsibility means choosing what you will carry forward now. It means refusing to let suffering become a permanent definition, not inventing a harsh explanation for why suffering occurred. Therefore, choose your ends lovingly. Choose dignity rather than humiliation. freedom rather than possession, mutual good rather than victory over an enemy. If you desire reconciliation, imagine peace, not submission. If you desire love, occupy mutual affection, not the conquest of a particular person. If you desire security, become inwardly settled rather than obsessed with defeating those you fear. And you may extend the practice beyond yourself. See a friend restored. Hear a family speaking in harmony. Imagine a community responding with wisdom. Do it privately, seeking no credit and claiming no coercive authority over another. Now let us gather the whole teaching one final time. The end is the fulfilled standpoint. The state is the identity occupying it. Assumptions are the truths accepted by that identity. Feeling is the natural reality of those truths. These were never four competing methods. They are four functions within one inward act. Confusion arose because one word was asked to perform the work of all the others. Clarity returns when each is allowed to do its own work. So test this tonight. Choose one worthy end. Form one brief scene that would follow its fulfillment. Enter it as a participant. Recognize who you are there. Notice what must be true there. Remain until the scene feels settled, and then rest. Tomorrow, do not dig it up through compulsive searching for proof. If the former identity speaks, hear it without fear. Do not condemn it, and do not obey it. Return to the completed standpoint. Judge the principle through experience. First, observe your inner speech, your reactions, your interpretations, and your actions. Notice whether they begin to arise from a different identity. Then allow outward developments to take their course without your anxious arrangement of every step. You came knowing four familiar words. Leave understanding one living movement. Now enter the silence as the person for whom the matter is already answered. Let the final inward word be not, I shall become, but the quiet, felt knowledge, I am.